The conventions operating in Britain are very relevant to India and can be adopted suitably to meet the conditions prevailing in India. Honorable Supreme Court has emphasized upon the importance of British conventions to interpret the constitutional provisions in India, as for instance, the decision of UN Rao versus Indira Gandhi. Supreme Court observed that we must interpret Article 73, Clause 3 according to its terms regardless of the convention that prevail in the United Kingdoms. If the words of an article are clear, notwithstanding any relevant convention, effect will no doubt be given to the words, but it must be remembered that we are interpreting a constitution and not an act of parliament. A constitution which establishes a parliamentary system of government with a cabinet, in trying to understand one may well keep in mind the conventions prevalent at the time of constitution was framed. The Supreme Court emphasized that conventions operating in Britain governing the relationship between the Crown and the ministers are very pertinent to the Indian Constitution as well, and the formal provisions of Indian Constitution should be read in the light of those conventions. In Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab, the court stated that it was not correct to say that the president is to be satisfied personally in exercising the executive powers. The president is only constitutional head or the formal head who exercises the powers and functions conferred on him by or under the constitution on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers. Whenever the constitution requires the satisfaction of the president for the exercise by him any of the powers or functions, it is not the personal satisfaction but in the constitutional sense the satisfaction of his Council of Ministers. The President's opinion or the President's satisfaction or decision is constitutionally secured when the ministers arrive at such opinion, satisfaction or the decision. The decision of any minister or officer or under the rules of business made under Article 77 Clause 3 is the decision of the President. The argument that an order could not be made by a minister without reference to the President is untenable. Describing the nature of the government, the court observed that it is a fundamental principle of English constitutional law that the ministers must accept responsibility for every executive act. In England, the sovereign never acts on his own responsibility. The power of the sovereign is conditioned by the practical rules that the Crown must find advisers to bear responsibility for his actions. Those advisers must have the confidence of House of Commons. This rule of English constitutional law is incorporated in our constitution. The Indian Constitution envisaged a parliamentary and responsible form of government at the centre and in the states, and not a presidential form of government. The court then said that whatever the functions vested in the president, governor, whether executive, legislative or quasi-judicial, in nature and whether vested by the constitution or by the statute, may be discharged according to the rules of business, unless the contrary is clearly provided for by such constitutional or statutory provisions. The court stated, the president as well as the governor is the constitutional or the formal head. The president as well as the governor exercise his powers as well as the functions conferred on him by or under constitution on the aid and advice of Council of Ministers, save in the spheres where the governor is required or under the constitution to exercise his functions in his discretion. Whenever the constitution requires the satisfaction of the president or any exercise of the president or the governor of any of the functions or powers, the satisfaction required is not that of the personal satisfaction but the satisfaction of the cabinet. That means the satisfaction of the Council of Ministers on whose aid and advice the President or the Governor generally exercise all his powers and functions. The decision of the Ministers or the officer under the rules of business made under any of these two articles, that is 77 Clause 3 and 166 Clause 3, are the decisions of the President or the Governor respectively. These articles did not provide for any delegation. Therefore, the decisions of ministers or the officers under the rules of business is the decision of the President or the Governor.